Hi guys, Shinra here, back with another banger YouTube video, and today we're going to be going over the official, newly updated Disco Debate tier list. Now, some things have changed, some people have gone up, some people have gone down. I've really edited this tier list a lot as time has developed, and today we'll just be going over, specifically where people are on the tier list, why they are where they are on the tier list, also motivating reasons I have. I won't be naming specific people, or whenever I'm talking about a specific tier, I'll be going over who best represents that tier, in the sense that what sorts of issues they have, and whether or not these sorts of issues actually map on to all of the rest of the people in that tier. So for example, in the case of Noodles, I should specify first that whenever I'm talking about a good debater, specifically I'm talking about somebody's ability to create arguments, right, or create good arguments, and their tracking. Those are the two most important things you need as a debater. Things such as rhetoric, they come as a byproduct of you having both of those things. And also, because obviously even if somebody gives a really good argument, yet they are unable to track their opponent's response, nobody's going to find it really that convincing, especially since it's obvious what they're saying just isn't a defeater. Nobody want to hear somebody out if the stuff they're saying just doesn't defeat anything, right? But aside from that, you can just go start off so Smoothie, Midnight, Monlon, Noodles, all of them specifically, they don't have much knowledge about anything, right? Their skill in terms of meta debating is really lackluster. I've seen Noodles specifically struggle with basic skepticism whenever he was debating Troy. I know Noodles had a really good reputation in the past, specifically because he beat Six that one time when nobody remembers. Supposedly Six was sleepy, but nobody cares about that cope excuse, right? But yeah, so he beat Six once, right? But after that, he just never done anything again. He's went on to lose to Apollo on Fiction, Apollo who doesn't debate Fiction. He's gone on to lose to a whole myriad of people, right? In fact, there was a point in which Juju, we all just sat down there and farmed the guy, right? But aside from that, he doesn't have much knowledge. In terms of rhetoric, his rhetoric is pretty lackluster. Sure, he has above average knowledge on Naruto, but that doesn't really convey itself properly through the level of argument he makes. It sort of seems like he's spamming scans at you, then he expects you to concede. Then moving on up into the middle of the tier, we have Archie. Now, the main issue I have with Archie specifically is just one, I don't think he's a very good reasoner, in the sense that I don't think his ability to think on his feet and be able to create arguments is that high, such that he'll be able to beat people higher than in his tier. And also, I don't think that his knowledge, the sort of knowledge he has, is also below average. In fact, the sort of places in which he does have knowledge, such as physics, they aren't very easily applicable in terms of philosophy, right, or just general debating, especially since Archie debates philosophy more than he does fiction, right, at least currently. So at least the sort of critiques I'd give to Archie are similar to the same sorts of ones I'd give to say Noodles, which is that one, he just doesn't read enough, he doesn't have enough knowledge, right? Two, he's not a very good reasoner, so he can't really think of it on his feet, right? So if you provide him and say somebody else equal knowledge, I genuinely think that 9 out of 10 times Archie is going to lose, right? Maybe if he said it was prime Archie, in the sense that Archie had his loud mic, and his loud mic just passively made everyone around him a worse reasoner because they're afraid of getting cut off, maybe sure in that sort of scenario, but in most scenarios Archie just typically doesn't thrive in a competitive debating format. Then moving on to the top of the tier, we have Lightning Jack. Now, the reason why I think Lightning Jack specifically is better than all of the other people below him is specifically, there's a few things. One, I think Lightning Jack, he actually does take the time to actually he takes the time to actually research the sort of topics he's talking about, in the sense. So for example, whenever he's talking about gun control, you can see it in his debate against Jester, which some people actually argue that he did win, right? You can see he researched the topics he talks about, right? He has above average tracking. Now he also runs into the same problem which I think people in the tier above him have, which is bullheadedness, where they think they found a defeater which really isn't a defeater, but then they zone in on it and they are unable to actually give it up in the slightest. And because they are unable to give it up in the slightest, then they just continue to keep zoning in on it, and then they immediately forget every other contention. It happens to a lot of people, but specifically for people people in the lower tiers, it happens to them more, right? I know like nobody likes getting cut off, but at some point you need to just realize that, okay, this person is trying to elaborate, maybe I should stop and let them elaborate. But Lightning Jax, his tracking is really nerfed by his bullheadedness sometimes. In terms of knowledge, his knowledge is like average for the topic he's debating. There's nobody really competent who he's debated. I know he debated like Apollo, right? But again, if he gets his backbone now by Apollo, I don't think that's really a good performance or a good way of measuring his skill. In fact, specifically, I think people somehow, like some way, might actually perform worse against people who are better, specifically because maybe you're getting fear hacks by the guy, and that causes you to perform worse. But like I doubt that was the case for Lightning Jax, because obviously he cocks to damage. So it's probably just a case of the guy's a really bad reasoner. Moving up, we have Flames. The reason why Flames is here isn't really due to any specific feat in terms of reasoning ability. Rather, it's all like any single like performances or reasoning ability. Specifically, it's because of the fact that somehow, somewhere, he manages to oddly beat people in his tier, right, or in the tier above. So, for example, you have Flames somehow managed to be able to beat Bubbles. Now, I wasn't there for the debate, right, but I do have people competent actually telling me that he did win that debate. And then you could also have him flat out on screen, on panel, beating Forks. And you know, many people like to say Forks is overrated. I agree, Forks is overrated. Basically, Forks is the method, right? Like, he used to be the method for everyone to get a quick jump into tier 3, into tier 2, right? But you know, currently Forks, like or at that point, everyone seems to have realized that Forks is just not really that good. So then Jack, or somehow, some way, how Flames was able to beat him, right? And it's like, okay, even though I do think Forks is overrated, I don't think Forks is the type of person who would lose to, say, Infinity, right, or lose at least easily to Infinity. So I think Flames has really earned himself in that position. In terms of improvements, Flames needs to improve his tracking, he needs to improve his argumentation, he needs to improve his knowledge. He doesn't really know much about anything. He also has this like weird thing where like immediately he learns a new topic, he immediately becomes overconfident about it, and because of his overconfidence, it leads to him making really basic errors in reasoning, because you know, sometimes people just are like that, right? But yeah, those are all the stuff I have to say about Flames. Moving on to the middle of the tier, like I did with the other one, we have Infinity. Now, in terms of rhetoric, I don't think Infinity is very convincing, and I'll explain why now. Specifically, whenever Infinity is talking, right, you can kind of tell, if you research the topic, you can kind of tell that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he also knows that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So instead, the plan is to be able to rhetoric his way and like overtalk his way through his opponent. So this usually takes a few forms. So it takes the form of either A, shotgunning, where he bombards his opponent with so many points, right, such that they are unable to properly respond. B, meta debating, right, where if you do call him out on a shotgun, then he'll start meta debating you on if it was a shotgun, right. That way he is able to successfully evade the main substance and actually derail into a completely different side point, such that his lack of knowledge is less easily exposed. Now, even though you will say it's an intelligent tactic, like nobody would disagree the tactic's intelligent. If I were, you know, confused about what I was talking about too, I'd probably employ the same sorts of tactics, right? But again, it doesn't really speak much to his argumentative ability. I think that his argumentative ability, I don't know if it'd even be much higher than Flames is. I think both of them are quite similar in that regard, in the sense that Flames and him are quite bullheaded, right? Both of them don't know what they're talking about, and both of them really think they do know what they're talking about. So you get to have a little bit of a laugh, right, whenever you see them saying that they know what they're talking about, right? Aside from that, you also have Manny at the top of his tier. Manny specifically, the reason why I think Manny is at the top of his tier is because, one, at least you can just look at all of the conversations he's had with Yanni now. Even though you might say that short conversations are in fact a bad way of gauging skill, and I won't disagree with you. Yes, conversations are a bad way of like engaging with skill. It also depends on the types of conversations that's being like going on. If it's just one of those friendly competitive mock debates conversations where okay, you are really trying to claim a feat on this other guy, right, but at the same time you are trying to like debate and win, it's like, yeah, okay, I think those are the sorts of conversations you can gauge competency off of. But I don't think that's what most people do, except for those niche Sakamoto days people, right? aside from that, moving on. So you're like Manly also consistently has vouchers from people like Gizbob, from people like Yanni himself, right, saying that he's actually extremely competent. In fact, I've seen some people saying that he's close to Yanni in terms of skill as a Sakamoto Days debater, right? Again, if you ask me like what sort of feats Yanni has on Sakamoto Days, I wouldn't be able to tell you, right? But I think Yanni on the baseline is a really good reasoner. So if you combine that with the fact that he has loads of knowledge on Sakamoto Days, then there's a very good case to say that he does actually he really is high skilled in terms of like Sakamoto Days debating. Gosh, I hit my mic, my bad. But aside from that, moving on, we have Trene. There's not really much I need to say about Trene. In fact, I think I've said mostly all there is to say about Trene. Right? Okay, so he's confused on philosophy, but even though he is confused, I think that most people below him, right, the sorts of arguments he makes, they might seem intuitive to say layman, right, who doesn't know anything about anything, right, but if you actually inspect his view, you notice that like the sort of stuff he's saying is just completely irrational gibberish. Moving on, we have InSync. InSync, he beat Moose in their debate. Now, even though I don't hold Moose to the highest regard, because I think he was actually losing some points to that boy when they did debate abortion, and also I think that Moose generally, right, he just doesn't have that many displays of competence. InSync has a weird superiority complex whenever it comes to other debaters for some odd reason. You can hear in the way he speaks, right? Like he speaks as if he knows more than people who clearly do know more than him, right? And because of that, it actually leads to him just making very basic blunders. I asked him specifically if there's a distinction between moral value and moral value and monetary value, and then he said yes. Oh no, he said there was no distinction, sorry. And it's like, that's obviously not true, right? But it's like the guy's really confused, and he ends up making loads of blunders because of his own superiority complexes. Moving on, because really nobody wants to hear about me speaking about Shiki. You have Godly beat Gios. He also beat Bubbles, and he beat Jester, supposedly. I don't know of the view that he beat Jester, but it's a fiction debate, so who really cares? For the benefit of the doubt, we'll say he did beat Jester, right? In terms of his debate against Gios, I've heard some stuff about Gios being able to beat Yugi, and even though me myself, I do not hold the best view of Gios, if we assume that Gios was actually able to pull off such a miracle, right, then you'd actually need to ask yourself, okay, well, how good is Godly? Now, personally, I think that the sort of issues Godly has are also the same sorts of issues that these other people have, which is specifically tracking, right, and honesty. So Godly and people in the tier above him, or Godly and people in the tier below him, right, they tend to easily fall into dishonesty, ratting, right, specifically just because they can save face. So for example, if they go into a debate, they realize that, oh my god, wait, this guy's actually smarter than I thought, right, they're going to immediately start trolling, and I know Godly does this sometimes because I've seen him engage in conversations with other people, and that is the mood he goes in. Then you also have the fact that he doesn't seem to know much about any series he's talking about at all. So in terms of knowledge, he's just really low because of the fact that, he's low on knowledge because of the fact that he doesn't bother to read the series he's talking about. And to make it worse, he just isn't a very good reasoner. So for example, I was having a conversation with Godly, we were talking about interpretations, and he said my interpretation could be false because there may be some evidence outside of our knowledge which may actually defeat my interpretation. It's like, okay, I think anybody with half a brain cell would be able to tell why that is straightforwardly false, right? Or that's like, just straightforwardly doesn't mean anything, right? Like, okay, yes, there might be some information outside my knowledge that disproves my claim. Like, that's true for every claim, right? So again, unless he wants to commit himself to some weird form of skepticism, right, which again I would need some motivation for, and he didn't actually, I don't think he's able to provide any sort of motivation for skepticism, right, then I don't think he's really that good. I think he and Gios also have the same sort of issues. Both of them are dishonest whenever it comes to making arguments. Instead of actually making arguments in which are convincing and in which are actually honest, instead they more so focus on, oh my god, am I able to spit out as many points as possible such that you'll be unable to respond? And the answer is like usually, yeah, sure, you can spit out as many points as possible. He just falls into like shotgunning. He always does shotgun, like in most of the times he's like speaking to people, and when he's not speaking to people, he also has the really dishonest strategy of like just saying, oh, we can move on. Immediately somebody like asks him to elaborate or something. But yeah, moving on to the middle of the tier, we have Lucario. Again, there's not much to say about Lucario. he knows a lot about the stuff he's talking about. At least the sort of stuff I'd say that Lucario needs to improve on is his aggression, right? Like, so whenever people like sit down there and they start pressing him, right, even if the sort of press that they're applying is completely like invalid, it doesn't make any sense. So somebody's just getting aggressive. You can like audibly tell when his argumentation goes down, right? So for example, the sort of arguments he's making will decrease in quality whenever the person who he's speaking to will be aggressive, which will actually allow other debaters which are actually conventionally worse than him to actually be able to win the debate against them, simply because they managed to get him angry. And it's like, okay, if you allow your emotions to rule your debate skill, right, like, it's like, that's an obvious flaw. Everyone will just try and troll you and get you angry. You also just falls into the Blue Marvel syndrome. Like, obviously, yes, I'm going to make fun of you because you're very easy to make fun of, right? Like, obviously. Aside from that, moving on to the top tier, Single Phoenix is the best of all worlds. You know, he's the best. He actually physically represents the best of all possible worlds. You know, rhetoric, argumentation, knowledge, all of them are exceptional, right? Such that he's within his own, like, he's at the top of his own tier. In fact, I'd put him in tier 2, but okay, I will need like symmetry, right? And he's a bit low because of that. I've spoken to Single Phoenix twice. Single Phoenix is really correct. There's no glaring weaknesses, right, or glaring issues in Single Phoenix whenever you look at him as a debater, right? I'd say the most glaring issue is just that, like, either A, he just doesn't care enough to like actually take most debates seriously, or B, he just doesn't read the law, right? And it's like, okay, that's fine, because I don't read the law either, right? But there's no real issue you can point out and say that's a major detriment to his ability as a debater. I think that Single Phoenix actually is a better reasoner than everyone else on his tier. I think that if you equalize knowledge between all of them, Single Phoenix would probably win, right? In fact, no, he definitely win, right? In terms of Hyde, Cakemouth, Hyde, I think, supposedly, according to Fallen God, has a better performance against Fallen God in comparison to somebody like C and Apollo. So Hyde also has his ability to control conversations, I think, is really underrated. Like, yeah, you can say it is annoying, and it really is annoying, right? But also, he can control a conversation really well. He sits there, he puts his foot down, and he just refuses to continue the conversation so long as it's not going in the way he's going, right? And most people typically are actually like more willing to give in to his demands, right, in comparison to give in to, or in comparison to actually hold true to what they're trying to do, right? Next, we have Gyra. Now, you know, most people don't like Gyra, right? Like, because Gyra maybe not accidentally doxed them. Like, most people don't like the guy. Like, he's a ball of sunshine. I don't know if he'd ever did that. Right? Like, Gyra never did that. But, well, you can just look at the facts. Like, Gyra he beat Hyde. I think he beat Hyde pretty soundly. In every single conversation I have with Gyra, he always continues to impress me. He gains knowledge constantly, right? And every single time, like, within each debate, it just looks like he's getting better and better and better, right? And obviously, if he's constantly getting better and better and better, and also, like, in terms of rhetoric, sure, that might be his weakest stat in comparison. His rhetoric is the weakest, not in the sense that his argumentation is lacking, right, but more so in the sense that he's unable to properly articulate his argumentation in such a way in which it will be very, very convincing to the average layman. Now, sure, upon watching the recording, you might think he won, right? But on its face, like, immediately you like listening to it, not really locked in, but yeah, just somewhat using your ears to listen, right? It's like, yes, you will actually be as convincing. So that's his weakest stat. For most of the people above that, oh yeah, we also have Sakuzuki now. You know, many people may be wondering with my series on me hating Sakuzuki, why would I have Sakuzuki that high? Now, I have Sakuzuki that high for a few reasons. Now, one, I think that he did really well against Brain Mason whenever they spoke, especially for somebody who has no clue in the world about probability, right? He did really well. I think that Sakuzuki, his skill shines in terms of neutrals, maybe because he's too much of a lazy little big loud ball, right? That he's unable to actually sit down there and read and study up on topics that he can actually discuss it with other people. But in terms of actually debating on neutrals, I would say that Sakazuki is what's it called? He is really good. I think he's better than all of the people who are there, right? I think the sort of issues that at least I can figure out, right, is that one, Sakazuki, he that could has like an aggression problem post debate, which causes people to want him to move down, right? Like, and I mean that really isn't an issue with his own debate style per se, but more so specifically just how he is, right? And we all love Sakapuki. But moving on to higher tiers, I'm just going to list feats now, because in terms of like naming people's flaws and what I'd pick out, it's like, well, I don't think I'm like qualified to do that. So I think K beat Julian, right, in their debate. I also think K beat Divinity, but I think Divinity has way more consistently better performances. So look at his performances against Cynthia, so that's why I have Divinity higher. I also think that Julian, the reason why Julian is that low, right, in comparison to all of them, is because I do think that he lost to CNI, right, whenever we did speak to him. I'm pretty sure it was on ethics. I forget what C spoke to him about, right, but I know C definitely won on judgment, and in my case, right, Eric, Aaron Goons, and I forget who the other person, and Cynthia, by the way, all thought that I was winning whenever like I spoke to Julian. Divinity, he's a top guy. Inspiring philosophy is only there for literally there for no reason. I don't think inspiring philosophy is very good. I think he's really incompetent, but he's also just there to fill in the position. He beat T-Jump, at least some may say he beat T-Jump, right? He also supposedly beat Destiny on theology, so there's that. But I don't think that really gets you anywhere, because I don't think Destiny is really good at theology, or anything aside from politics per se. Arianus, he tried to flirt with Cynthia, it failed. He tried to catfish somebody else, he failed. There's nothing good about his personality you can really comment. At best, he's just been relegated to Hyde's bodyguard Grunt, right, where the Grunt is actually better than his superior, in the sense that all he does now is he sits there and he goes into comments and he comments Hyde 1, right, at the bottom of the comments, and it doesn't really do much, right? Like, in fact, I have screenshots of him admitting that Apollo is like way better than him, even after he's gone through all that trouble making all those community posts saying that, oh my god, these Jamaicans are way better than Apollo, da 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 da. It's like, he's really corny. There's nothing you can say you like about him outside of debating. In terms of actually debating, the only thing I know about him is that he lost really badly to Brain Mason, right? But yeah, supposedly he beat Detroyer, so there is that. Is Mason too? I think his Mason is just Destiny but better. I think he has better reasoning skills than Destiny. I think he also has more knowledge on the stuff he's talking about in comparison to Destiny. Alright, so because of those two things, right, I think he's better than Arianus. But what I will say though is I heard his Mason lost to Divinity, so the order would probably be something like this, right? But yeah, aside from that minor edit, yeah, for all the people above me, you can just go and watch their debates online. At least I think that this is a pretty comprehensive list of most of the tier list. I think that if anybody has real disagreements, you could just go and watch the debates. I think any rational person would agree with the sorts of views I hold if you watch the debates without holding any biases. So with that said, this has been the Discord Debate Syndicate. That was my Discord Debate tier list. This has been Shenra, and I'm out. In a bit.